Welcome to Level With Us, the show where we have a cozy video game discussion, and this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Today I'm going to be interviewing two people. One of them is going to be familiar to the listeners, and the other probably isn't. So, today I am joined by Marcus.
Oh, hello.
And also Nathan.
Hello.
These two fine gentlemen run a podcast called Aurelius Whitlock's Murder Museum. We've mentioned it on the show before, but we've never had you both on Level With Us. And the reason we're doing that is because both of you have been independent of the podcast, working on a new detective video game called The Rise of the Golden Idol. Is that correct? Am I correct in...
Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah. Did I?
Of course, and it's fun that I get to be here on the podcast rather than the host. Instead,
You're
be
a guest
game
this
developer
time.
guest.
Ooh,
That's
you're
right.
in the hot
Right.
seat.
That's mean. Well, it means Jared has to do the heavy lifting. I'm not going to be asking any questions. You can't expect any color commentary from me or witticisms. I'm here as a guest.
That's right.
It's my day off.
And as of this recording, it's launching in a few days. And before we dive into the game itself, I mean, Nathan, you haven't been on this show yet. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm a co-host of Aurelius Whitlock's Murder Museum, like you said. So we do our own murder mysteries on that podcast. But again, I'm also a narrative designer at Color Grade Games, the studio behind The Rise of the Golden Idol. So I love puzzles, murder mysteries, and pretty much everything in between. So, yeah.
Which, I mean, everything you just described is also up Marcus's alley. So I feel like you guys found your creative soulmate, so to speak. Like, you guys are really good partners.
Yeah, sometimes it's not until I'm around other people besides Nathan that I realize how niche my interests and skill set are. Because with Nathan, I can be like, let's talk about a very specific kind of murder mystery puzzle, and with other people, it's like, what? When you say murder mystery, what does that mean? Anyway,
One of my favorite things about listening and sometimes helping out on your show, Aurelius Whitlock, is hearing how excited both of you get over the same things, such as a time loop, or, there was, it was, I don't know, hallucinogenic gases, right?
Oh yeah, we'd go
Whoa.
crazy if that ever popped up.
That's the one.
Going off that, I still remember the first time I technically met Marcus. He was wearing a Mystery Skulls t-shirt, and I was like, that's sick. That's super cool.
Oh, and I gave him that t-shirt, and that's what inspired Nathan to come talk to you, Marcus.
Yeah, it's too bad that I forgot about that encounter.
But it's really cool to see both of you, again, work on creative things before this game, but now both be hired on as writers and narrative designers for this new detective fiction game. So let's talk about it. The Rise of the Golden Idol, by now, one of you has had to have perfected the elevator pitch for what this game is. Like, can either of you succinctly in a sentence say what this game is to someone who's never heard of it?
We're not actually marketing guys, so I'm not sure how succinct I'm going to get this. It is a point-and-click style murder mystery game where you are collecting phrases by clicking around an environment and on people's testimonies or what they're saying. But it's a moment frozen in time, and you are tasked with filling in what is going on, who killed who, whatever the event is. So you'll be presented with blank, blank, killed blank, blank, because blank, blank, blank. And so it is a deduction style game that really makes the player have to understand what's going on, which makes for what I consider to be really satisfying detective puzzles.
So this game is a sequel to a game called The Case of the Golden Idol, and I played that with you, Marcus, and afterwards I think we both agreed, I think we even talked about it on this show, we both agreed it's just one of the best detective games, flat out, by really making you have to deduce. Like, there is not a lot of hand-holding. Like, they give you all the clues, they make sure it's solvable, but you have to do the legwork to fill in those gaps and piece together what happened. So that's really cool that both of you, this theme that you specialize in, so to speak, as connoisseurs of murder mysteries, are now working on the Rise of the Golden Idol. Nathan, do you want to describe like how you were introduced to it?
Oh yeah, sure. So I found out about this opportunity because Marcus was in the Discord and heard about them looking for new narrative designers for the second game. So he pinged me, and we both applied. Got through the interviews, and they liked us well enough. In the interviews, we found out that they were also interviewing our friends Bill and Danny, who we've been on their show, Escape This Podcast, before. And one of the reasons we started our podcast, which was super cool and a little intimidating as well. But they liked all of the interviewees enough, at least the 5 of us. We also have Will, that they decided to give us all a try. And luckily, thankfully, they kept all of us on. So, yeah.
Very, very cool. You know, Nathan, you used the term narrative designer. I was going to ask, like, when you tell people you work on this game, what do you say? Do you say, I'm a game dev? Do you say, I'm a writer? Is narrative designer your go-to terminology for your position?
Yeah, I tend to use narrative designer because it's more than just writing the exhibits, where we are like designing the narrative XYZ, but I think narrative designer also encapsulates we're writing the mysteries, we're writing what's going on, but we're also putting it into the engine. We're the ones coming up with puzzles, so we're designing the puzzles. Marcus and I have semi-taught ourselves how to use Godot, and through various drag and drop things that we're actually putting it in the engine, fixing the text and doing everything there. So it's like baby coding, but yeah. That's
awesome. What about you, Marcus? What do you say when people ask you, oh, what do you do on that game?
Yeah, I would say something similar to what Nathan said, which is writer. You know, if someone's played the game, then they'll probably understand what writer means. But for someone who hasn't played the game, something that includes the word designer makes a little more sense.
Sure.
We are doing all of the content stuff that does not require artistic talent.
Yes.
Like we'll make everything with our like temp art, but then of course we have artists who do a wonderful job. So, but yeah.
That's awesome. That's cool. You know, I mentioned this game as a sequel. Does that come with like some expectations? You know, you guys have enjoyed video games almost your whole lives. What's it like to be on the other end and like not know you're about to put a game out there and not know how it's received? Like, do you feel any pressure at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, we don't actually know how it will be received. A lot of sequels kind of get a bit of flack for just not being the original. And also this is our, you know, like you said, our first foray into this industry. So it feels possible that it might be a one and done. Like, we didn't add as much to the experience as we thought. I would say in general, I'm optimistic. And also I do think that this game kind of fulfills some promises, like some assumptions people might have, which is this game is bigger, it's longer, it's got even more detailed art and new puzzle approaches and stuff like that. But at the core, it's the same kind of simple mechanics. So I have hope that it will be well received, but as of recording this, we just don't know.
We were talking about this the other day. Like, it's a weird arc that we've had where we played the game, we loved the game, and then this opportunity came along, and now we are shaping the world. We're messing with the world, the characters in it as well, and that's just strange to look back on. But yeah, like Marcus said, I've really enjoyed working on it, and I'm really excited not just for the base game, but for the DLCs that's coming out too. Again, it's a lot bigger. I think the base game in this one has 25 scenarios, and then
oh wow,
the DLCs total have 4 different arcs and 21.
I would say like
20.
at least 17. Yeah,
that's a lot of content.
At least 17 scenarios.
Yeah, especially
so we're still
since
busy.
a single one of those can sometimes last almost an hour. So it's still a short game, but it's not as short as the first game. It's
sure, that makes sense. So you mentioned now you enjoying this piece of media. Now you're actually deciding some of the lore and stuff, which is kind of cool. I imagine that's how a lot of people feel when they start working on an IP that they previously, consumed either as a child or, recently. I'd love to hear from both of you how you approach writing a murder mystery scenario? Obviously, no spoilers, like no solutions, because, hopefully people listening to this will go out and experience the game themselves. But, like, how do you even begin? Like, every scenario is a vignette frozen in time with clues you can click on, words to collect, and then, a Mad Libs board where you fill in all those clues. But do you start with, like, the story? You're like, okay, what, how this fits in the overall narrative? Do you start with, hey, what would be cool kind of thing? How do you start designing a scenario, a murder mystery scenario for this game?
There's some things in common with the way that we write mysteries for our murder mystery podcast. I will say that for Golden Idol, it usually starts with there's a certain output we want. Like, we want the player to walk away from this scenario with this additional piece of knowledge, this realization of, oh, this person is trying to do this, or this object can be used in this way. And then with that kind of starting seed, then we actually get quite a bit of freedom to think of different settings we think would be cool, or different, almost set pieces. I think that, for me, at least, I usually start with, a central setting or, set piece where it's like, oh, that would look cool, or, oh, that's interesting. People will immediately know that this is an interesting or convoluted or scary, I kind of go for evoking a certain emotion, and then I sort of go into the details of the characters, who did what, and it goes through a lot of iterations of testing to figure out what actually feels right and what actually makes sense. Usually we have an idea and then we have to try to justify a lot of the things, wait, why would they do that? Why would it happen in that way? Why couldn't they just do this instead? So that's where I think the first bit of work really comes in, is justifying ideas that are really just supposed to be cool. And then we're like, oh, but now I have to explain.
Yeah. On that note, we had a whole, not too much spoilers, but we had a whole piece about electrocution and exploding chandeliers, and could we pull this off? Does this make sense? How faulty would the wiring have to be for this to pull off and whatnot? So it's a very logic-based game, which is kind of fun. But yeah, like Marcus said, we have outcomes, we have where we want the story to go, and then we figure out fun scenarios that encapsulate that. What's really cool is we get to work with a lot of different scenarios. The main designers, the Clavin brothers, they were super encouraging in exploring new settings for every scenario. We didn't want things that felt the same or felt repetitive, and we had a lot of fun exploring the principles and the murderous outcomes, but also the arc coming through all of that.
So would you say that that you made scenarios that had to fit a narrative, or the narrative changed based on the scenarios, or both?
I would say both. I would say that there were some fairly hard and fast things that were oh, this is the outcome here that we need. But then there was also wiggle room. The Clavinses were very cool in letting us, pitch ideas and kind of push against. That's one nice thing about this not being a well-established IP. It's still, malleable.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's the word.
But at the same time, the Clavinses also had, strong feelings about how they wanted this game to be. For example, one rule they kind of have is the logic of the world should make sense in real life. The only thing that should be mystical or science fiction should be certain pieces of technology, mainly the Golden Idol itself. So early on, I think I tried to pitch some ideas that were oh, and this is sci-fi, right? Why don't I just throw this other thing in as well? And they're but then we have a lot of questions about that. So they both had a clear vision, but also a willingness to let it be shifted around a bit.
And you're referring to the developers of the first game, who are still heading up this sequel.
Yeah.
That's right.
Very cool. So cool that you get to work with a team of writers. Did you have a lot of autonomy in designing your themes? Were Marcus, you and Nathan on most of the same scenarios? Did you do individual ones, or did you pair up with other people on the writing team, like Bill, Danny, and Will?
So we've done a combination of like all of that. So initially we got hired on for like a trial period. So Marcus and I worked pretty steadily together. And then after that, each kind of writing team got their own arc to be in charge of. And then Marcus and I kind of headed different scenarios in that. And now we're each of the writing team, Bill and Danny, Will, Marcus and I are each heading a separate DLC as well. So we're still conferencing with each other, and it's been really helpful to have the others to like play through things or bounce ideas off of, especially when like you've stared at a scenario for hours and you're like, I don't even know if this makes sense anymore. I know too much. And so it's been really helpful to have other people come in with fresh eyes. So.
Yeah, especially other people who are doing the same thing that you're doing. I imagine getting fresh eyes would help. That's the first thing I thought of, was just like, man, I think I'd get too much in my own head about, readability, and it just does this make sense? So I don't want to get too far into it, but what do you think your personal strengths are? Because everyone brings something different to the table, right? You've got a wonderful team of writers to collaborate with, but do you identify within yourself, or maybe in each other, when you think of like Marcus's scenarios, Nathan, what do you think is a strength that he has, or just in general, since you also work together on the podcast?
The first thing that comes to mind is set pieces, and then there's not a better way to phrase this, but then just like clever ideas, and especially clever puzzles. I wish I could spoil things, because there's a scenario that came from Marcus that was really a really fun thing to play with, and then same with there's a scenario that came a lot from Marcus's wheelhouse, and how that plays in with the puzzle mechanics, and how that builds on the puzzle mechanics and builds the story is really cool. And so I don't know, that's just not something I ever would have thought of. That goes even deeper with the DLC that he's working on right now as well, which I can't say much about, but. Again, the set pieces, and then the ways he expands the puzzle system.
Well, that's very kind.
Yeah, what about Nathan, Marcus?
Nathan, I would actually say some similar things about puzzle design, because Nathan has experience with designing a lot of different like riddles and puzzles. So, and that's one interesting thing about this game generally, is rather than just being like, murder mysteries where you have to figure out like method, motive, who done it. Mm-hmm. Usually the way to get there involves a little bit of kind of, logic puzzly stuff. Not always, but frequently. And Nathan has some really strong puzzles in the scenarios he's worked on. I also think, I don't know if this is a strength of mine or just something I kind of like. I enjoy including little bits of like humor or just like sort of absurd stuff. So much so that sometimes I would err on the side of like cartoony in my pitches. And so that I'd have to dial it back a little bit. But I would say actually that's something that I think Nathan and I both excel at, is a little bit of lightheartedness in what we design. So,
I couldn't agree more. And if knowing you and also listening to your podcast, I mean, that seems to be something that, because both of you love murder mystery, but you don't like dwell on the dark aspects of it, right? Like murder mystery can be fun. It can be lighthearted, even though it may deal with some heavy topics. You two find the fun in it, and the humor as well, especially when it comes to funny, weird side characters or, lines of dialogue. So maybe that is something I'll look for. Did you, Marcus, you said you would err on the side of cartoony for the pitch and you had to reel it in. Were you specifically ever called out on that? Where like, no, that's too silly. We need this more grisly kind of thing.
I think that the game creators definitely called some of my ideas, like they said, like, that sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon, or that sounds like it's straight out of, fill in the blank, like, silly thing. And so that was usually my indication of like, okay, like this maybe has to make a little more sense. For example, like, I don't think this is a spoiler. There's one thing where I was like, oh, and then the person can sneak this stuff into this other place, by like putting it in his large belly because it's like padded with pillows. And then he sort of laughed. He's like, "That sounds like a cartoon villain." I'm like, "Yeah, but it could work."
That's great. That's cool. I was actually about to ask, was there any scenario that you were excited by but you had to toss out, you weren't able to use in the game, or are those like off limits because you might use them in the future?
I mean, we can still maybe use them in the future, but there was a while that we were working on a scenario that involved an art forgery that is not in the game. There was also another one that I think was like a spelling bee or like a scholarship competition.
Ooh, interesting.
You're right. Oh, I forgot about this one. Yeah.
There is a talent show in the game, so you may see some similarities or some relics of the past in that one, but yeah, there are several settings or ideas that got scrapped.
What about you, Nathan? Anything that pops into your mind? Or like, oh
Yeah,
man,
no.
I wish I could have done that.
I was going to mention the art forgery. It had blackmail, it had murder of a security guard, but in the end, it didn't quite accomplish what we needed it to. But I just love museum settings, so thus. We had quite a few DLC pitches too. And what's funny is I pitched like three or four different ones, and they all got merged together. So the ideas that didn't get used separately, but they combined into some terrifying, horrific, murderous
some
adventure.
monstrosity, some abomination of a murder mystery scenario.
Yeah. I'd call it an abomination too. Yeah. No, it's exciting. I'm really excited. I think Nathan and I have said this before, but I'm actually even more excited about the DLCs coming out because I think it shows how, being a pretty green behind the ears team, or sorry, what is it? Fresh, wet behind the ears.
I like green behind the ears. Let's say that, whatever that means.
Anyway, just we learned a lot in the base game, and I think that DLC really has some good stuff to offer.
Has helped you like be confident. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, but even the ones that you've very loosely described about the base game have made me very excited because it's reminding me of how much I loved the Case of the Golden Idol, and like how some of those scenarios involved having to figure out and learn the rules to a card game in order to figure out the identity of the people playing it, right? Or, things like that where it's like, oh, it's not just whodunit, it's this really interesting, like, learn the rules of this cult, learn the, figure out logically who won the race, or, fill in the blank, right? So I'm personally very excited to experience this new game. I guess to start to wrap things up here, is there any fun stories about the development that you can share with the listeners? And if not, is there anything that, you're specifically looking forward to hearing people experience?
I mean, just for things I'm excited for. I'm just excited to see the people experience it as a whole, because we've tested a lot of the scenarios, but I haven't seen a lot of people play through the whole thing. I'm really curious to see when people pick up on things. That's why I'm excited to have some of my family and friends play it too, so I can see their aha moments.
I imagine that'll be really satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one, I guess, interesting anecdote is at one point I had a puzzle where people are naming a device. And it was like a true logic puzzle where essentially there are 4 different people who give names for the device that are 4 words. And then a person said, like, everyone only had 2 words that ended up in the final title. So it was like very, very logic driven. And then the solution is it spells out the acronym IDOL, idol. Sort of as a tongue in cheek, like, oh, we're calling it the idol. But I played through the scenario at one point, and that puzzle wasn't in there, and so I asked about it. They're like, yeah, no, we just had to scrap that. Like, there's no way we can get that translated in a way that would be satisfying in any way.
That's true, huh? You have to think about the language. That's pretty interesting.
And there are some pretty squirrely language puzzles. This is a very language-based game, so the fact that we're that the team is releasing it in multiple languages, in multiple translations at launch is really impressive, and hopefully, well received in every language, because there's a lot of moving parts in a translation for a game like this.
No kidding. I think that's really commendable. Well, obviously, all of us here on this this interview here, all of us want this game to succeed. But there might be some people listening that aren't, might be on the fence, or they're not sure if this game is for them. Who would you recommend this game to? It's a pretty crowded indie market out there. It's kind of hard to stand out. Who do you think would enjoy this game the most?
I think the easiest way to recommend this game is to say if you liked The Return of the Obra Dinn, you'll enjoy this. In my opinion, there's a lot of shared DNA between this and deduction games like that.
Yeah, so I think it really appeals to fans of the old point-and-click games, because like Marcus said, it has kind of that point-and-click mystery aspect to it, but then also fans of typical mystery games too. I think of things like Tangled Tower, Detective Grimoire, which we really loved. Marcus and I played that together, and yeah, so it's casual. It's not your Souls-like or anything like that. But yeah, the casual point-and-click mystery fan.
It would have been funny at the beginning if I, asked Marcus to give that elevator pitch, and he's like, yeah, it's the Souls-like of detective games.
Weird. There's nothing Souls-like about this. Not a thing.
Well, I certainly recommend this game based on the little I've experienced of it, and I will be picking it up day one. If you wish to purchase The Rise of the Golden Idol, I'll include some links in the description. It is coming out on November 12th, and it will be on pretty much all platforms, including mobile if you have a Netflix account, but also Steam and the Switch, and I believe pretty much every console. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And Marcus and Nathan are generously offering a free game code to experience this game. So if you're interested in entering to win, you can comment on the YouTube version of this episode and say your favorite piece of detective fiction. So that could be literature, it could be a detective video game you really liked, but share, your favorite piece of murder mystery literature. Do you guys think that's a fair contest?
Yeah,
I think
that's a great
perfect
submission. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I need permission from you guys. I mean, you're the experts here, right? Okay. Fantastic. Well, I had a lot of fun talking to both of you. Really looking forward to the game. Thank you so much for making time for me tonight. And best of luck with the game launch.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thanks for rooting for us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, I'm Jared.
I'm Marcus.
And I'm Nathan.
And we'll level with you next time.